Sometimes, the quietest people hold the loudest stories. They don't speak much. They exist on the edges of the room, almost invisible. But if you look closely, really closely, you'll hear them. Not through their voices, but in their eyes, in the motion of their hands, and in Karana's case, in the pages of her sketchbook. Karana was a nobody at school. She wasn't a top student, not a club leader, not even someone the teachers would often call by name. She was just that girl in the back. No one knew where she came from. No one remembered the day she started showing up. But they all remembered the day she stopped. Every morning, Karana arrived with quiet steps, always carrying the same faded blue backpack, always hugging that small sketchbook like it was the only thing keeping her alive. She would sit by the window, in the very last row. She hardly spoke. Even when teachers asked her a question, she'd respond with a small nod or a quiet yes. But her hands, they never stopped moving. As if that was the only way she knew how to speak. Each page of her sketchbook was filled with pencil strokes, faces without names, skies without color, trees without leaves. Silent stories that no one bothered to read. No one asked her what they meant. No one tried to understand her drawings. Until the day she didn't come back to school. That was when everything changed. But that moment hasn't come yet. This is the beginning. The beginning of a story drawn in silence. Before time ran out.
No one really knew what was inside her sketchbook. Even her seatmate, who had only been assigned next to Karana 2 weeks before she disappeared, only saw one page. And even that was an accident. That day, the wind was unusually strong. The classroom window had been left slightly open, and a few of Karana's papers flew off her desk. One of them landed near her seatmate's foot. He bent down to pick it up, meaning only to return it. But something on the page caught his eyes. It was a drawing of a small girl standing alone in a dark room, her hand reaching upward as if begging to be held. And behind her loomed a shadow, a faceless, human-like figure. It wasn't just a sketch. It felt painful. Before he could say anything, Karana snatched the page from his hands. Her eyes, wide, almost terrified. As if he had just read a secret that wasn't meant to be known. She said nothing, just lowered her head and packed her papers into her bag without a word. After that day, he started watching more closely. He noticed that Karana didn't just draw. She poured herself into each pencil stroke. Each line felt like a memory captured. Or maybe, one she couldn't erase. Her sketches weren't just art. They were voices. But no one was listening. Everyone thought she was just shy. Everyone assumed she was fine because she never cried. But they forgot. Some people don't cry outwardly. Some people cry in lines and shadows and silence. And Karana, she had been crying this whole time. On every single page. Ever since he saw that sketch, her seatmate, Davin, couldn't shake the feeling. He started watching Karana more closely. Not out of curiosity, but because something in that drawing lingered in his mind. Like a whisper that hadn't finished speaking. He began arriving early to class, pretending to read. But his eyes kept drifting toward her. And that's when he noticed something he hadn't before. Kirana always drew in complete silence, even when the classroom was loud and chaotic. She was completely absorbed, like the world outside didn't matter. And every sketch started with the eyes. Eyes. No matter what she drew, people, animals, even trees, she always started with the eyes. And strangely, those eyes looked alive, but never happy. They seemed to carry a weight, a sadness that had been buried too long. One day, when the teacher was late, Davin worked up the courage to talk to her. "You like drawing?" he asked softly. Kirana paused. Her eyes met his for a moment, then dropped again. She nodded, barely. "Where'd you learn?" Silence. Then, quietly, she replied, "Didn't learn. I just draw. So I can let the feeling out." "What feeling?" She didn't answer. But she opened her sketchbook, showing him a page. It was a drawing of a small bird inside a cracked cage. Its feathers were falling out, and its eyes stared longingly out a nearby window. Davin stared at it. Something inside his chest cracked, too. Then she whispered, "If I don't draw, I disappear." Silence followed. He didn't know what to say. But from that moment on, Davin understood. Kirana wasn't just drawing for fun. She was drawing to breathe, to stay present. And silently, she had been trying to tell the world. Before it was too late, Davin had started seeing more than just drawings. Kirana wasn't just sketching pictures. She was writing letters to the world. But not with words. With lines, shadows, and shades of gray. Each day, a new page would appear. Sometimes a human figure, only half drawn. Sometimes an empty chair facing the sea. Sometimes a small house with windows that were always shut. It all felt like pieces of a puzzle. And Davin began taking notes. Not to invade her privacy, but to understand. He felt like she was speaking. But the world was too loud to listen. Then, one afternoon, Kirana didn't show up to class. No explanation. No message. Davin waited. One day. 2. Then a week. On the 4th day, he did something he'd never done before. He asked the homeroom teacher for her address. Said he wanted to deliver a forgotten notebook. It was just an excuse. What he really wanted was the truth. Her address was written neatly in the attendance book. That evening, Davin stood in front of a small, faded greenhouse. Its iron gate rusted and squeaking in the wind. The house was silent. No voices. No movement. But one window was slightly open. He knocked. Once. Twice. No answer. He was about to leave when something caught his eye in the mailbox. An old envelope, crumpled, with no name. Just a small drawing on the front. 2 hands reaching toward the sky. His fingers trembled as he opened it. Inside, there was no letter. Only torn fragments from Kirana's sketchbook. 5 pieces in total, each with a different image. But when placed side by side, they formed a face. Kirana's face. But not the Kirana he knew. This one was crying. And just below the tears, scribbled in pencil, were the words, "I've been speaking." No one answered. Davin stood frozen. The world around him faded into silence. And for the first time, he truly heard Kirana. TT. The 5th day without Kirana. The sky looked like it was holding back tears. School went on as usual, but one empty seat in the corner of the class felt too quiet. Davin sat there, alone, staring at the blackboard, but seeing nothing. The only sound he heard was inside his own mind. Fragments of the images he'd seen. Kirana's final words on that torn paper. And her last look, just days ago, as if waiting for someone to finally understand. But no one really did. And now, maybe it was too late. The lunch bell rang. Students rushed out, laughing, joking, unaware that someone had been quietly fading beside them. Davin didn't move. He reached into his bag and pulled out his notebook. The one filled with notes about Kirana's drawings. He started to draw. Not because he was good at it, but because he wanted to try. To feel what Kirana felt. To understand the silence. Line by line, he tried mimicking her style. But the more he drew, the more he realized. This wasn't about skill. It was about pain without a voice. And Kirana had been pouring that pain onto the page. Suddenly, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Davin turned. Someone was standing at the classroom door. The homeroom teacher. Davin, she said softly, can you come with me for a moment? In the staff room, everything felt quieter than usual. The teacher sat down and looked at him seriously. There's news from Kirana's house, she said carefully. Her mother just got back from out of town. Kirana isn't home. Davin held his breath. They say she left a letter. And some sketches. Half-burned. Silence. The police are looking for her now. But they said she might not want to be found. The world stopped. Davin clutched his notebook tightly. His eyes burned. But no tears came. Because when someone disappears not because they want to leave, but because nowhere made them want to stay, that's not just leaving. That's being silently pushed away. And all of us, without knowing, helped push her. That night, Davin sat at his desk, staring blankly at a clean sheet of paper. The desk lamp glowed dimly, casting shadows on the wall. Kirana's drawings were spread around him, copies, notes, and the final sketch he had kept, her crying face. He pressed a pencil to the page, trying to write something. But not a single word came out. What good were words, when everything was already too late? His phone buzzed. A message from the class group chat, anyone know where Kirana is? Replies followed, short, careless. She's always been weird. Probably ran away. Just more drama. Davin didn't reply. He just stared at the screen. Behind every joke was indifference. They had never truly seen Kirana. And now, even with her gone, they still didn't really care. He opened his notebook again, flipping to the last page. It was blank. But not for long. Slowly, he started drawing. This time, not Kirana, but himself, sitting in the corner of the classroom, watching her from afar. And on that drawing, he wrote one line. I saw you, but I was too afraid to speak. The next morning, Davin brought the drawing to school. He quietly pinned it to the class bulletin board, the one no one ever used. No name. No explanation. Just the image. And that one line. Days passed. People began stopping in front of the board. Some smiled, puzzled. Some read the line slowly. But one by one, they began to add their own little images. A student drew a flower. Another sketched an open window. Someone even pinned an anonymous poem. The board, once empty, became a place for all the voices that had once been ignored. Davin stood from a distance, watching. He wasn't seeking attention. He just wanted Kirana to know. Even if the world had been too late to listen. At least now, they were trying. And sometimes, trying is the first step to saving someone who hasn't completely disappeared. 3 weeks had passed since Kirana disappeared. The police had found nothing. But among the remnants in her room, her mother discovered something overlooked. A half-burned piece of paper, with black ink still partially legible. She came to school. Her face thinner, her eyes swollen. She handed the paper to the homeroom teacher. "This might be important," she whispered. The teacher called Davin in privately. Not because he was a suspect, but because he was the only one who truly seemed to care. In the staff room, Davin read the paper slowly. Half of it was charred, but a few lines remained. "I don't want to leave, but each day feels like sinking slowly. And when I try to speak, the world covers its ears. I draw so that at least my pain stays on the page, not in my chest." Davin went silent. His hands trembled as he held the scorched paper. "Do you think she's still alive?" the teacher asked gently. Davin stared at the ceiling. He didn't know. No one did. But deep down, he felt Kirana's story wasn't over yet. Together with the teacher, he began planning something. Not a search, but a call back. 2 weeks later, the school auditorium transformed into a small art gallery. On the walls, dozens of drawings were displayed, not just Kirana's, but also pieces from other students inspired by her. There were paintings of pain, longing, and even hope. At the center of the room, one framed drawing stood out. A portrait of Kirana, her eyes not fully closed. Beside it, a note read, "If you're reading this, we haven't given up. The world may be late, but we're still here. Still listening." The exhibit was titled, "The Unspoken." Parents came. Teachers, students, alumni. Some cried in front of the drawings. Some pinned small notes expressing feelings they had never shared. The room became a witness. That pain can become a shared language, if we're brave enough to hear it. See. He retraced the paths they used to walk together. The small corner store where Kirana liked to buy sweet bread. The little park bench where they silently shared earphones without speaking. And the old bridge overlooking a dark river, the last place he saw Kirana truly laugh. His steps stopped there. He gazed at the slow-moving water. "Where are you now?" he whispered. No answer, of course. But the breeze moved gently, brushing his cheek like a reply. From his pocket, he pulled out a folded paper. A drawing he had never shown anyone. Kirana standing at that very bridge, wearing the hoodie he now wore. Her eyes looking forward, her smile faint. As if she wanted to speak but held back. Davin took out tape from his backpack and gently fastened the drawing to the bridge's steel railing. He didn't wait for anyone to see it. He just wanted to leave something, a quiet trace. As if saying, I'm still looking for you. And I'm not done yet. That evening, an elderly woman feeding pigeons nearby noticed Davin from a distance. She watched him for a few moments, then approached the spot after he left. She read the drawing carefully, then smiled softly. From her shopping bag, she pulled out a wrinkled slip of paper. It held a simple sketch, a girl with small wings. She placed it just below Davin's drawing. No words, just the picture. The next day, there were 3 more drawings. Then 5. Then dozens. The bridge became a quiet place that spoke. Davin returned a week later. He stood stunned, seeing the entire bridge rail covered in artwork. Not just about Kirana, but about grief, hope, and longing. Someone had written, I lost my sister last year, but I still talk to her every night. Another wrote. Davin sat in his dimly lit room. In front of him lay an open notebook. Page after page was filled with sketches and small scribbles. All about Kirana. Not just her face, but the way she moved, the way she looked. The way her silence always felt like a scream from deep within. It had been a week since the bridge became a space of sharing. Still no news, no clues. Davin started doing something he never had before, a letter. Hi, Kirana. I don't know where you are. Maybe you'll never read this. But I'm writing because I can't stay silent. Every day feels empty since you left. But I'm starting to understand. Maybe you felt lost long before that. I'm sorry I didn't hear you sooner. I'm sorry I waited for you to speak, when I should have been the one to reach out first. His hand paused. He took a deep breath. The night sky outside shimmered with faint stars. There's so much I want to say. But if I had to choose just one thing, I'm here. Still. And I won't stop until you know that. He closed the letter and folded it slowly. Then slid it into a plain white envelope. No address, no recipient's name. He wrote only one word on the front. For you. The next day, he returned to the bridge. The wind was colder than usual. He stood at the same spot and tucked the letter between the rail and the steel pole. He knew the wind might carry it away, or the rain might ruin it. But he left it anyway. Not to be found, but to be released. That night, a teenage girl in a blue hoodie stood at the far end of the bridge. She didn't come closer. She simply stood behind a post, watching the spot where Davin had stood earlier. Then slowly, she smiled faintly, and walked away to the other side, her steps calm. That morning, Davin sat at a bus stop, sketchbook in hand. He wasn't drawing, just staring at a blank page, waiting for something to move inside him. Then something made him look up. A middle-aged man approached, holding a crumpled brown envelope. Someone asked me to give this to you, he said, simply, then walked away. Davin blinked, puzzled. There was no sender's name. He opened the envelope carefully. Inside, there were 3 things. A pencil sketch of his own face, drawn by Kirana. A short handwritten note. I drew you before I disappeared, so I wouldn't forget who once helped me stay alive. A ticket to a small art gallery named Silence. His hands trembled. His eyes welled up. He didn't know who sent it, or why. But he knew this was a trace. A trace of Kirana. That afternoon, Davin visited the gallery. It was tucked between old shops and graffiti-covered walls. Inside, the air was still. Wooden floors creaked softly beneath his feet. The first room was filled with paintings, all in bluish-gray tones. Human silhouettes, faceless portraits, windows opening into nothingness. But each painting held a recurring symbol, a winged star. The same symbol Kirana used to doodle in the corners of her notebooks. When they sat next to each other in class, Davin walked deeper into the gallery. In the last room, there was only one large piece. A towering canvas showed a girl standing in the middle of a swirl of black ink. Her hair messy, her eyes hollow, but in her hand, a sheet of paper. On that paper, a drawing of a boy, smiling and reaching out. Davin stepped closer. Beneath the painting, small words read, "To the one who stayed. I hear you now, finally." He stood there for a long time, speechless. No one else was in the room. Yet he felt heard. For the first time since Kirana disappeared, he didn't feel alone. A week later, Davin returned to the Silence Gallery. But the place had shut down. The wooden sign that once read Silence Art Gallery was replaced by a new one, for rent. As if the gallery had existed just long enough to deliver a message. But in Davin's mind, the story wasn't over. He felt there was still something left unsaid. Something Kirana hadn't yet shown. He searched for any information on who had rented the gallery. He dug through art forums, scrolled through social media, and asked the shop next door. Finally, he got a lead. The gallery had been used by a young woman who only came at night. She never gave her name, always arrived with paintings, and requested the place be kept dim. Something inside Davin stirred. That was Kirana. He was sure. Days later, an anonymous account posted a short video online. It was only 8 seconds long. A dim corner of the gallery appeared. Faint lighting, soft footsteps, and the silhouette of a girl taping a drawing to the wall. Davin watched it over and over. He studied every movement. At second 6, the girl turned toward the camera and smiled. It was a smile he knew. Not just a happy smile, but one of release. A smile of someone finally seen. He rushed home, flipping through all the drawings Kirana had left. Each sketch now looked different. There were clues, hidden symbols, subtle patterns. Road signs, tiny coordinates, compass directions scribbled in the margins. Davin started putting it all together. It felt like Kirana had never truly wanted to disappear. She wanted to be found, but only by someone who truly looked. That night, Davin rode his bike to the hills outside town. He followed the hidden map until he reached an old wooden house, almost swallowed by trees. He got off his bike, heart pounding. By the door hung a small bell, shaped like a winged star. He didn't knock. He simply stood there. Then, a voice from inside responded. "You came after all." The old wooden door creaked open. Dim light revealed a girl's face, her hair longer, her frame thinner, but her eyes still Kirana's. Davin froze. He had so much to say, but his voice failed him. He just stood there, staring at her. Kirana looked back, offering a soft smile. "You're always slow." but you came. Kirana stepped aside and let Davin in. Inside, the house was filled with drawings, sketches, handwritten notes, faded paper clippings. Pieces of a life she had hidden from the world. I never went far, Kirana said softly. I just hid from all the noise that kept distorting me. She sat on a small wooden chair, facing a window that looked out into the forest. Davin took the seat across from her. They said nothing. But in that silence, 1,000 words pressed between them. When I drew you, Kirana said, I just needed one face to stay clear in my mind. One that wouldn't melt every time the world shifted. And Davin swallowed. I kept searching, even when I had no idea where to start. Kirana smiled, but her eyes shimmered. I was afraid you'd give up. So was I, Davin replied. But you left just enough signs. And I started learning to really see. They sat in that quiet little room. No music. No bright lights. Just two people who once saved each other without realizing it. Now finally finding each other again in the silence. Then Kirana stood, walked to the corner, and picked up a large sketchbook. She handed it to Davin. This is the part of my life I haven't drawn yet. I want you to be part of its pages. Davin opened the first page. It was blank. Except for a single line written at the top. If you can see me without sound, then you can also help redraw my life. Davin didn't respond. He simply bowed his head and smiled. For the first time in a long while, Kirana didn't feel like a ghost. And Davin didn't feel lost. They didn't know how much time they had. But for that night, they weren't alone anymore. Several days passed. Kirana and Davin began filling the blank pages of that large sketchbook. Not with perfect stories, but with pieces of ordinary days. Burnt toast for breakfast. Laughing over spilled paint. Late night talks under candlelight. Small things that felt like life. Kirana started drawing again. At first, her hand trembled, but over time, her lines grew steadier. She no longer drew to hide the pain, but to face it, welcome it. I used to think my drawings were too dark, Kirana whispered. But maybe I just didn't know how to use color yet. Davin helped, sometimes just by sitting quietly beside her. Sometimes by ruining a sketch just to make her laugh. He wasn't trying to save her, only to walk with her through the process, without pressure. One morning, Kirana opened a new page. She drew a little girl standing in the middle of a garden, holding a paintbrush in hands covered with color. The face wasn't recognizable. But somehow, Davin knew it was a younger Kirana. A version that still believed the world wasn't all bad. Do you want to go back to that time? Davin asked. Kirana stared at the drawing for a long moment before answering. Not go back, just make peace. Their days weren't always peaceful. Sometimes Kirana would be silent the entire day, staring at a single point. Sometimes she cried for no reason. But now, she didn't run. She didn't hide. Davin learned not to always ask why. He learned to be present, without judgment, without rushing to fix. One night, they made a small campfire in the yard. Kirana placed a drawing into the flames, the darkest one she had ever made. Not to forget, but to mark a turning point. Her pain was no longer the end of everything. I used to think my life was over, she whispered. But maybe I just hadn't reached the next chapter. Davin held her hand. And for the first time, Kirana held it back, tight. That afternoon, the sky looked like a pale canvas. Kirana sat at her small desk, staring at a blank page in her sketchbook. But she wasn't drawing. In her hand was a pen. She began to write. To anyone who has ever felt not enough. Who has ever disappeared behind a smile. This letter is from me. Not as someone who is fully healed, but as someone who still chooses to live. Davin came beside her, sitting in silence. He didn't interrupt. He just read each line as Kirana wrote. The letter wasn't addressed to anyone specific, but it felt like it was meant for everyone who had ever quietly drowned. I used to draw a world so I could live inside it. The real one was too harsh. But now, I know. The world doesn't have to be perfect to be livable. Kirana paused. Tears welled up, but this time, she didn't wipe them away. There were days I didn't want to see the sun, because its light felt too honest. But then I realized, shadows only exist when there is light. And that means I'm still here. She wrote faster now, afraid the words might vanish. If you're reading this, and you feel like you can't go on, remember, just breathing is enough today. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be strong all the time. When she finished, Kirana closed her book, stood up, and took the letter outside. She didn't put it in a mailbox. She rolled it gently, tied it with a thin string, and tucked it into the crevice of an old tree in the backyard. Davin raised an eyebrow. Why there? Kirana answered softly. If someone really needs these words, nature will help them find it. Davin didn't laugh. He nodded. And in the quietest part of his heart, he believed that maybe, someday, someone would find that letter right when they were about to give up. And maybe, their life would change. Because someone named Kirana chose not to give up first. Weeks passed. Kirana's paintings now covered the walls of the house. None of them were perfect. But each stroke was a new breath, a mark that she was still here. Davin sat in the living room, gazing at a large painting Kirana had just finished. In it, a girl stood at the edge of a cliff. Her hand reaching out, not to fall, but to touch the light breaking through the clouds. Is that you? Davin asked softly. Kirana nodded gently. Not the me from before. The me who chose to stay. That day, Kirana received a letter from the art university she once left. It wasn't an acceptance letter, but an invitation to exhibit her work at an alumni showcase. Someone from the university had seen her work online. Kirana gave a small smile. I once left because I didn't feel worthy. Now they're asking me back as an artist. A few days later, the exhibition opened. Kirana stood in a room filled with her paintings. Some visitors stared for a long time. Some asked if the stories behind her paintings were true. Kirana answered calmly. Everyone falls. But not everyone chooses to rise. In one corner of the gallery, a single painting hung alone. It was the image of a little girl, holding a paintbrush and standing in a colorful garden. A small child looking at it asked, "Who is she?" Kirana replied with a smile. She's someone who almost disappeared. But then, she drew her way back home. That night, after everyone left, Kirana sat alone in the gallery. The lights were dimming. She looked at all her paintings. Davin entered with 2 cups of warm tea. "Your first exhibition," he said with a grin. Kirana nodded. But not the end of the story. Outside, rain began to fall. Not heavy, just a soft drizzle, like a whisper. Kirana walked to the window. She placed her hand against the cool glass. "My life didn't change magically," she said. "I'm still afraid. Still have dark days. But now, I'm not alone." She turned to Davin. "Thank you. For not saving me, but for staying." Davin held her hand once again. Behind them, on the final gallery wall, hung a single handwritten sentence. She drew her life. And in the end, she chose not to end it. Story finished. Thank you for listening to my story. Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share. See you in the next story.